Dr. Craig will now begin his closing statement. He has 5 minutes.
Well, I want to thank Dr. Rosenberg for a very stimulating debate this evening. I hope that you've enjoyed it as much as I have. In my closing statement, I'd like to draw together some of the threads of this debate and see if we can come to some conclusions. In tonight's debate, I presented 8 reasons why it's reasonable to believe in God and 8 reasons why metaphysical naturalism is unreasonable, in fact, absurd. Now, Dr. Rosenberg has presented only one argument for atheism tonight, and that is the problem of evil. And it was very clear in his last speech that he hasn't understood it. He says, why couldn't God have created people with free will so that they always chose to do the right thing? This has been dealt with by theists dealing with the problem of evil. And the reason is because the wrong subjunctive conditionals of freedom might be true for God to actualize such a world. There are possible worlds which are not feasible for God to actualize. Because if he were to create the creatures in certain circumstances and leave them free, they would go wrong. And as far as we know, for all we know, in any world of free creatures in which there's this much good in the world, there would also be this much evil. And it may not be feasible for God to actualize a world having this much good without this much evil. That doesn't mean the Holocaust is necessary. No, not at all. But it would mean that in a world in which, say, the Holocaust didn't occur, other events would have occurred that would have been comparably evil. So what Dr. Rosenberg, again, would have to show, or the atheist would have to show, is that there is no, he would have to show that God has the ability to create another world, another possible world of free creatures that would involve this much knowledge of God and eternal salvation as in the actual world, but without as much suffering. And there's no way that the atheist could prove that. It's utter speculation. And that's why the argument is regarded today as bankrupt. Now, with respect to the arguments for metaphysical naturalism, I think what Dr. Rosenberg has done for us is he has described brilliantly what an atheistic world would be like. It is a world in which there is no meaning, no truth, no thoughts about anything, no moral values, no enduring selves, no first-person perspectives. His only mistake lies in thinking that that world is our world. But it manifestly is not. Our world is not Dr. Rosenberg's world. Our world is a world in which we do exist. We do have thoughts about things, and in which there is, therefore, meaning, truth, and value. And Dr. Rosenberg admits that theism provides a better explanation of such a world than does atheism. And since our world is evidently such a world, it follows, I think, that it is reasonable to believe in God. In addition to that, I presented 8 arguments for belief in God. He, in his last speech, says, why are you so committed to the principle of sufficient reason? Because a very modest version of that is plausibly true, namely, that if a contingent thing exists, there's a reason or an explanation why it exists rather than not. And given that principle, which is very plausible and modest, you need an explanation for why the universe exists. This is especially evident if the universe came into being at some point in the finite past. It can't just come from non-being. I won't repeat what I said about the applicability of mathematics, intentional states of consciousness, objective moral values, the resurrection of Jesus. The sources we have for the resurrection of Jesus go back to within 5 years of the event. And they were not written in Aramaic. He's just incorrect. They were written in Greek. And we have the New Testament in the original language in which it was written. And the text is 99.8% authentic and pure. So doubts on that head are simply groundless. The one thing that we haven't talked about tonight is my 8th point, that God can be personally known and experienced. And I want to close by saying this. I myself wasn't raised in a believing home, although it was a good and loving home. But when I was in high school as a junior, I met a Christian who sat in front of me in German class who shared with me her faith about God's love. I had never heard of this before. I began to read the New Testament. And as I did, I was captivated by the person of Jesus of Nazareth. Well, I went through a period of about 6 months of soul searching, at the end of which I just came to the end of my rope and gave my life to Christ. And I experienced an inner spiritual rebirth that I've walked with day by day, year by year now for over 40 years. A spiritual reality that I believe you can find as well if you will seek Him with an open mind and an open heart. So as I close tonight, I would encourage you, if you're seeking for God, do what I did. Pick up a New Testament, begin to read it, and ask yourself, could this really be the truth? Could there be a God who loves me and cares for me and gave Himself for me? I believe it could change your life just as it changed mine.